Alpha 1 copies, Command.
That's reported.
Some thing ambushed us. Hudson, Frost, and Drake are KIA. Send reinforcements. Repeat, send reinforcements. Ah!
If there is anything certain about mankind, it is that we will turn anything and everything in existence into a weapon of mass destruction. And the latest in humanity's arsenal of death is genetic engineering. On a remote island 120 miles west of Costa Rica, a group of scientists set out to create the ultimate life form, one capable of causing an extinction-level event on the island. The result was a monstrous theropod known as Indominus 2.0, a Tyrannosaurus with ape-like arms, enhanced body armor, a devastating venomous bite, and the ability to reproduce indefinitely via parthenogenesis. The specimen and her offspring quickly breached containment, wreaking havoc across the island and causing untold amounts of human casualties. Among these casualties were 3 scout teams from the eco-paramilitary group known as the Kilo Yankees, who were sent to analyze the genetic experimentation and assess the potential threat. Unfortunately, there were no survivors. Almost immediately after the scouts were lost, Hammerfest Isle was contacted with a proposition: create a hybrid capable of killing the Indominus in single combat. Despite initial hesitations, the offer was accepted as the Kilo Yankees quickly realized that they would not want to be left behind in the field of military-grade genetic research. This offer was also accepted by various organizations across the globe, each with their own motivations and agendas. As the researchers got to work and a containment blockade was formed around the target island, one thing became clear to every member of the Kilo Yankees. The time of speculation and theorizing had come to an end. The great hybrid wars have begun. The first step in creating a hybrid capable of eliminating the Indominus in single combat was analyzing the target specimen for weaknesses. A thorough analysis of the target showed that this would not be an easy feat. The base Tyrannosaurus genome was a formidable foe in and of itself, but additions such as body armor from the African dwarf crocodile, arm structure and dexterity from the chimpanzee, enhanced teeth and metabolism from the northern short-tailed shrew, parthenogenic reproduction from the whip-tailed lizard, and claws from Allosaurus annex came together to create a hyperactive, well-balanced killing machine. Therein lay the critical weakness, determined the technicians. A killing machine in a constant state of adrenaline rush could theoretically be exhausted quickly. Combined with the anticoagulant properties present, it stood to reason that a large enough wound could result in the animal bleeding to death quite rapidly. From there, a strategy was devised. Create an animal capable of ambushing the target, cause a fatal wound, and be able to avoid attacks if something went wrong. Agility, intelligence, terrain adaptability, cutting power, and endurance were the core pillars that would eventually build the Saurian super soldier known as Volkov. Selecting the base genome was the most important step. It needed to be in the same weight class as the Indominus, but built for agility, attacked with intent to cause bleeding, and lived amongst other large theropods to ensure built-in combat instincts. For this task, there was none better suited than Carcharodontosaurus saharicus. While this made for a powerful basis, augmentations were needed to handle the violence that the Indominus would certainly bring. When it was discovered that Allosaurus possessed a wide range of motion within its neck designed to endure being tossed around without breaking, it became the obvious choice as the next contributor. Furthermore, this genome served to enhance the arms on Volkov to be better adapted to grappling and tearing, while also providing the grip and tug method of biting that would be used to deal the bulk of damage. The rivalry between Allosaurus and Torvosaurus would further bolster the genetic instincts of Volkov against larger theropods in combat. Augmenting the bite to cut through armored targets was a necessity given the thick hide and full body covering of osteoderms present on Indominus 2.0, and the teeth of Allosaurus annex were not suited for the task at hand. For this reason, the genome of a tiger shark was selected for Volkov's teeth. Tiger shark teeth are curved, serrated structures that act like saw blades, known for being able to slice through turtle shells. This structure, particularly when paired with the grip and tug motion that Volkov would utilize, would cut through even the thickest armor with ease. Tiger sharks, like most sharks, also replace their teeth almost daily, lessening the negative impact of a lost or broken tooth sustained in battle. The next choice was the turkey vulture for a multitude of reasons. For starters, the hooked beak increased the piercing ability of Volkov's bite, decreasing the likelihood that the target will escape from a bite without losing a sizable chunk of flesh in the process. More significantly, the turkey vulture possesses one of the most impressive olfactory systems in the entire animal kingdom, if not the most impressive. This would allow Volkov to detect and track targets from miles away, ensuring that nothing can hide from him for long. The digestive and immune systems of the turkey vulture also provide significant long-term benefits for Volkov. If a new plague truly were to spawn from the Indominus 2.0, Volkov would be able to contain it via eating contaminated carcasses with little to no ill effects. While the vulture covered disease resistance, there was still the matter of the venom wielded by the Indominus 2.0. The solution to this was found in the Mexican beaded lizard. These lizards separately developed a venom similar in structure to that of the northern short-tailed shrew, and are immune to this type of venom as a result, as well as having a natural resistance to other types of toxin. The venom itself is delivered through saliva, and is intended to work alongside a bite that digs into the flesh of the target. While Volkov would not be using the venom itself, he would use the venom delivery system. Finally, this lizard sports a full body covering of small osteoderms, which would act as light armor for Volkov. Further modifications took form with a large claw on the hands and a muscular tail, both courtesy of Baryonyx Walkeri. The large claw that is Baryonyx's namesake would aid greatly in grappling opponents, keeping them still while Volkov delivers a powerful bite. In addition, Baryonyx provided a flexible, muscular tail that will allow Volkov to be better adapted to moving through aquatic environments. The arms were close to completion at this stage, but they needed two factors to bring them home: dexterity and opposable thumbs. Both of these came in the form of the bonobo. The arm mechanics of great apes are legendary, being both incredibly strong and with unparalleled dexterity. It's no wonder that an ape was also chosen for the Indominus 2.0. However, the bonobo specifically was selected for their renowned ability to create and use tools, a trait which will be carried over to Volkov. Most importantly, the bonobo contributed sweat glands, enabling Volkov to perspire during combat. Most of his genome is composed of animals used to warm or tropical environments, with the dinosaurs all being used to an Earth that was on average 5 degrees hotter than modern day on the Celsius scale, so sweating won't occur most of the time, thus lowering the chance of this leaving a scent trail. It would, however, cool him down during combat, increasing endurance and allowing him to stay in the fight longer than his quick-to-exhaust opponent. At this stage of development, Volkov's body plans and abilities were satisfactory, but there was still room for improvement. While the bonobo did contribute some cognitive ability, this needed to be bolstered in order for Volkov to truly understand his body and use all of his abilities to their full advantage. After some discussion, the common raven was selected to bolster Volkov's cognitive ability. Not only are ravens among the smartest animals to ever live, rivaling even humans in some cases, but their avian DNA would better synergize with most of the other contributors, reducing the possibility of behavioral issues stemming from genetic incompatibility. In addition, raven DNA provided the ability to give Volkov a light coat of feathers, which would be used to help him blend into the environment of Isla Nublar. While the science team could have called it good, they decided that an ace in the hole was what would push Volkov over the edge into being a combatant capable of eliminating the Indominus 2.0. Volkov already had a saliva-based venom delivery system, so they needed only to supply venom from the boomslang. This venom is a hemotoxin, destroying red blood cells and causing excessive bleeding throughout the body. This, combined with the cutting power of Volkov's bite and claws, would work together to make short work of any target. This is also where the high metabolism and adrenaline rush of the Indominus 2.0 would work against it, as the elevated heart rate and anticoagulant properties of the Indominus 2.0 would cause it to bleed out quicker. Finally, the boomslang's instinctive method of administering venom, holding on and chewing, synergized with Volkov's grip and tug bite mechanics. Finally, it was time to decide on aesthetics. While the science team could have gone for something bright and intimidating, they instead decided on something to help Volkov blend in. After all, his feathers would already act as a pseudo-ghillie suit, so coloration was the only thing necessary to bring it home. There was no choice considered other than standard tiger stripe, as it is not only effective in jungle environments, but also the standard camo pattern for forces of the Kilo Yankees. With these elements in place, a synthetic egg was created to incubate the embryonic hybrid. Then, all that could be done was wait with bated breath. Days turned to weeks, and as news of a potential disease outbreak from Nublar hit the public, many began to feel as if the doomsday clock was one stroke closer to midnight. Time was of the essence, and a crucial battle would be against panic. Arguments grew between angry colonels and frightened scientists, both equally frustrated at the fact that nature could not be rushed. Tensions rose as fear gained a foothold. All of which would fade away almost instantly the moment that a single, life-giving crack appeared.
For weeks upon months, the scientists had considered Volkov to be many things. A bioweapon, a scientific marvel, a violation of the natural order, and many other cold readings. Yet when the eggshell finally broke, and the hatchling drew his first breath, the science team realized what he truly was: a miracle. Measuring a single meter in length and weighing no more than 3 kilos, it was hard to believe that this adorable little creature would grow to become a fierce predator, let alone one capable of combating the most powerful bioweapon the world had seen up to that point. For the time being, though, that thought wasn't crossing a single mind on the island. Volkov's earliest moments were ones of confusion and intrigue from his perspective. As measurements were taken and vitals were run, the little hatchling couldn't help but observe in wonder and confusion. Were these strange creatures his parents? They were present when he hatched, and were the first things he saw, but even so young, he could tell that they looked nothing like him. Maybe he'd grow up to look like them? Questions cycled through his mind until he was set down and presented with a strange pile of red. What is this, he thought. He leaned in to smell it, wondering if it would give him a clue. When he did, something happened. He suddenly had this overwhelming urge to put it in his mouth. Without hesitation, he scooped up a mouthful, swallowing it before he could truly savor the sensation on his tongue. He then proceeded to eat another bite, then another, enjoying the flavor, stopping only when his belly felt full and heavy. His parents began making noises. He couldn't understand them at first, but he knew that they were happy. And thus, so was he. He had so many questions about everything, but he knew that he was safe and loved, and that was all that mattered. As Volkov grew and matured, the situation on Nublar evolved as well. The first bioweapon created to combat the Indominus had been deployed. Known only as Hank, this powerful monster would set the stage for the conflict moving forward. While he unfortunately fell in battle, the Indominus specimen was injured heavily in the confrontation. Ironically, this Pyrrhic victory only served to bolster global morale, as this was enough to prove that the monster was not invincible. Still, the invasive population was growing with no signs of stopping. Soon after, an extended containment plan was announced. A small population of Proboscidean hybrids would be introduced to the island, helping to contain and stabilize the threat by acting as both combatants and natural prey. The organization who deployed them also announced that they would lead the efforts to research a cure for the Indominus plague, leaving the task of killing the animals themselves to all other parties involved. This would be done by deploying well over 1,000 hybrid animals to the island in one of the largest joint operations in history, codenamed Operation Destroy All Hybrids. While still officially involved with this, the Kilo Yankees devised a secret failsafe, outfitting Volkov with a tracker, providing GPS targeting for an experimental weapon known as an orbital ion cannon. The idea was that if Volkov fell in battle, they could ensure the destruction of one or more hostile specimens thanks to the combined power of nearly 10 tons of TNT and flash temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. Internally, this was known as Operation Jungle Fever. Some objected to the idea on the grounds that they didn't want Volkov sent to his death, but they came around to the idea that it was simply a measure to ensure that if Volkov did fall, then he would be avenged, quite literally, without delay. Once he stood 2 meters tall at the hip, Volkov was moved from his nursery grounds to the larger preserve on the island. Here, he'd continue to grow and hone his skills as a predator and combatant, while being allowed to return to the grounds and interact with the base personnel as he pleased. Within reason, of course. As much as the soldiers and scientists alike loved him, nobody was going to take their chances with a megatheropod under any circumstances. Volkov himself felt the newfound distance, but his worries were always quelled by a pleasant tone of voice from everyone he met, from the vets giving him a routine checkup to the guards just saying hello on their routine patrols. He wondered if this was perhaps just what it was like to grow up, to be expected to go out and take a part of the world as your own. Granted, this newfound freedom and direction was intimidating at first, but he at least knew that he had a home to go back to. Then he wondered what it would be like if he didn't. What if he just had to fend for himself as soon as he hatched? Could that even happen? His wandering mind was suddenly interrupted by his stomach growling in hunger. It was time to hunt. Stalking through the underbrush, Volkov kept a keen eye on the horizon and his nose to the wind. The base personnel taught him to hunt as best as they could by releasing prey animals into his nursery, but this was the real deal. He'd have to rely entirely on his intuition and senses to snag a meal. The fact that he hadn't been hand-fed for ages helped encourage him, leading up until the moment where his hunting skills were all that stood between him and starvation. Remembering his training, he focused hard and caught something on the wind. The scent of fresh dung, laced with traces of fruity and earthy smells. He knew this as the droppings of prey, and judging by the strength, it wasn't far. Swiftly and carefully, he followed the scent through the underbrush. After some time, he finally spotted his quarry, a small herd of Maiasaura, recently relocated from a defunct zoo and allowed to live on the wilds of the island preserve. All healthy, 4-ton grown adults, seasoned by a life lived as quarry on a private reserve before being rescued and moved to the wilds of Hammerfest Isle. This was Volkov's first true test. He was no stranger to hunting prey, but previously had only gone after poultry, boar, and cattle. Certainly no joke in their own right, but this was a hadrosaur, an animal fine-tuned by millions of years to survive attacks from theropods much larger than Volkov. If he weren't careful, his lunch could flee with ease, or worse, use their weight to pound him into the dust. Still, he steeled himself and quietly observed the herd. It wasn't long before he spotted one walking with a limp, a broken ankle that had healed improperly. Jackpot. As he circled the herd, he carefully crept closer to his target, getting as close as he could without being spotted. Once or twice, they got suspicious, but Volkov's feathers and camouflage patterns blended him seamlessly into the underbrush. Soon, he found himself within range, the injured hadrosaur a mere footstep away. He waited until his prey bent down for another drink, then struck, Bursting from the foliage, he wrapped his arms around his prey, digging his thumb claws deep for extra stability, and then sinking his teeth and beak into the leg. Startled by the commotion, the entire herd bolted in all directions, leaving their injured friend behind. The hadrosaur bellowed in shock as it bucked and kicked in a futile effort to shake the predator loose. But Volkov held firm, his specialized joints weathering the violence like reeds in a hurricane. All the while, his teeth cut deep into the flesh, and his saliva soaked muscle and vein alike. Finally, Volkov ripped a sizable chunk from the hadrosaur and let the animal go before his luck ran out, allowing his prey to try and run for its life. The whole thing was over in a matter of seconds. Limping away, the hadrosaur thought itself lucky to escape with merely a single bite wound, but that bite was all that was needed. The hemotoxic venom from the bite had already started working, destroying blood cells throughout the body, causing the wounds to bleed profusely while denying oxygen to the rest of the body. The hadrosaur could barely focus on anything aside from the intense pain, until its vision began to fade, and it couldn't focus on anything at all. Finally, it fell to the ground and passed out, never to wake up again. It never even realized that Volkov had been following the entire time. He would spend the next few days feasting on the carcass until it had been kicked clean. His first hunt was a complete success. Weeks passed. The global health crisis started by the Indominus plague began to plateau, as did the populations of Isla Nublar. The stopgap measures seemed successful, but the problem would not be truly resolved until all hybrids were raised to maturity and sent to quell the Indominus population. Meanwhile, Volkov had continued to hone his skills as both a hunter and as a combatant. He had carved out his own territory near the base, hunting hadrosaurs and young sauropods at his leisure, all the while returning every so often to check up on the personnel. By this point, he had grown so large that few would approach him outside of routine checkups. While he reasoned that it was for their own safety, given that he had the same feelings as a hatchling, he nevertheless longed for a companion that loved him unconditionally. That is, until one day he wandered towards an estuary near the base, and saw some scientists interacting with a fairly large creature. They were feeding it fish, and speaking to it in much the same way that they would speak to him. From his shoreline vantage point, it looked almost as large as the boat they were on, if not slightly bigger. Curiosity overcame him, and he waded out into the water. As he approached, he noticed the creature, Akula, slowly dove into the bottom before changing color to hide amongst the sand. Volkov took a step back. He didn't mean to scare Akula, but he wasn't sure how to convince her that he wasn't a threat. Then he remembered the fish that the men were feeding her. He scanned the water carefully and spotted a rather large catfish within arm's reach. Carefully, he reached towards it and just barely managed to snatch it with his claw before offering it to Akula. Slowly, she approached, being cautious on the off chance that this was a trick. But as Volkov showed no signs of hostility, she let her guard down long enough to snatch the catfish from his claws. She then realized that he just wanted a friend, and nuzzled against his leg to show her affection. As he grew, Volkov became accustomed to the various routines of the island. Veterinary checkups, the various herds roaming the new food sources, even the phases of the moon began to catch his attention. But out of all the wondrous sights and smells, one caught his attention above all else. Every 14 days, after the sun had set and the stars were out, the base personnel would haul a large object out into the middle of the ocean. It would stay in place for a little while, long enough for everyone to leave the area. Then, a charge would be felt in the air, with small little sparkles floating around. The sparkles would get bigger and grow in number, while a faint sound could be heard getting louder and louder. All of a sudden, a giant column of light would strike the object, sending waves high into the air and bathing the area in a moment of brilliant blue. It was as if the stars themselves had struck an offering that had been made to them. Volkov learned the routine by heart and always made sure to find himself on the shore closest to the blast. Afterwards, He would wonder what it would be like to be in the middle of that column. Would it feel like intense sunlight, or like fire? What would happen to him? Would he even notice? Such questions kept his imagination afloat. Eventually he decided that, based on the fact that any objects fed to the light were never seen again, he probably wouldn't survive being too close. What a fascinating way to end it would be. Weeks turned to months. News broke that a cure and a vaccine for the Indominus plague were finally ready for deployment. This meant that the time for operations Destroy All Hybrids and Jungle Fever drew near. Many worried that Volkov would not be ready for such a fight in time, and whispers of pulling out began to float around the base. But as if fate itself was tempted, their fears were quelled one day. An aging Triceratops named Brutus had been a problem on the island, attacking anything that wandered too close. He was too old to reproduce, but his hormones still drove him into a musk-like rage periodically, usually resulting in serious injury or death for his herdmates. One day, though, he found himself a little too close to the perimeter gates. He spotted a Humvee of vets conducting their usual survey, and took serious exception to its existence. He charged at full speed while the team was distracted, knocking it over and crushing the leg of one of the vets. He kept pushing and smashing the wreckage as hard as he could, spurned on by the frightened screams of the man whose femur was now powder. Another vet looked on, seemingly unable to do anything but watch in horror. But he couldn't just sit there. He had to do something. Instinctively, he began thrashing a fallen branch on the nearest tree and shouted at the top of his lungs. His plan worked, as he soon found himself staring down the snout of 10 tons of pure hormonal rage. There was no running, no escaping what would come next. The end was near, and it would likely not be swift. Suddenly, there was a burst of feathers and scales from the underbrush. The once mighty trike was immediately pinned to the ground, blood gushing from the nape of its neck. By the time the vet team could look up at the carnage, Brutus had already bled out and died. Standing above him, head held high, was the now fully grown Volkov. He had been keeping tabs on the vet team for some time, always staying just out of sight, but staying close in case something went wrong. When Brutus attacked, he waited for the perfect opportunity to strike, and wasted no time in getting the job done. It was a professionally executed strike, one worthy of Hammerfest Isle's most elite commandos. From this moment on, there was no doubt. Volkov was ready. At long last, the sun rose in the morning that everyone had anticipated and dreaded. There would be no more speculation, no more number crunching, and no turning back. Operation Destroy All Hybrids was already underway, with over 1,000 hybrids landing on the northern shores of Isla Nublar, where the concentration of Indominus specimens was strongest. As part of Operation Jungle Fever, Volkov would instead be inserted to the southeast, near where Alpha Team had been eliminated. At 0400 hours, Volkov was sedated, then airlifted aboard the KFS Montauk. Once aboard, the Montauk set sail for Isla Nublar, and while he was still under, the surgery commenced. He awoke a few hours later, confused, but relaxed when he noticed that the vets he had known his whole life were attending to him. He could feel himself and the whole ship moving, but he wasn't sure where. The familiar scents of Hammerfest Isle were gone now, save for the exhaust of military engines and the natural breeze of the open ocean. Even then, this was unusual. The exhaust was far more intense than even the tanks and jets of his home island, and he could tell that the ocean he was sailing on was not his own. Questions ran through his head. Where was he? Where was he being taken? Was everyone moving, or just him? Did something happen? Did something go wrong? Did he do something wrong? Some of the vets noticed his agitation and talked him through it. They told him not to worry, that he was going on an important hunt, and that he would be home at the end of it. In truth, he didn't understand most of the words that were spoken, but he understood the calm and reassuring tone of voice. He chose to do the only thing he could, and wait for the destination. Eventually, the shores of Isla Nublar came into view. The once flourishing island had already begun deteriorating over the course of the initial quarantine. What was once a seemingly unbroken jungle spanning the whole island was now patches of trees amidst oceans of grass and seas of dust. Still, the danger within was undetectable from the shore. Volkov would not be going in blind, however, as a scent sample had been provided to every participant in Operation Destroy All Hybrids. With this in hand, the soldiers led him down to a waiting LST, which ferried him from the Montauk straight to the shores of Nublar. Almost instantly, he caught the scent and made his way inland. With the sun at its apex, Operation Jungle Fever had officially begun. Hours passed, shadows extended, and the heat of mid-afternoon cooked the island, filling the air with the scent of death. Volkov continued onward, never losing the scent nor breaking his focus, until he stumbled upon human remains. Scavengers had mostly picked them clean until nothing remained save bones and tattered sections of uniform. A uniform which seemed familiar somehow. Carefully, he reached down with his mighty claws and picked up one of the larger scraps. Emblazoned on this section of uniform was the symbol of Hammerfest Isle. These men were Kilo Yankees. Now Volkov knew the full extent of his mission. This was not a test nor a territorial dispute. This was justice. His quarry took the life of his family, and now it was his duty to take righteous vengeance. He roared into the afternoon sky, frightening a flock of crows as his fury echoed across the island. He wasted no time picking the scent back up, and marched onwards with renewed vigor. While his determination never waned, as he continued following the trail, hunger and fatigue began to set in. An army marches on its stomach, especially one composed of a single soldier. The scent of his quarry slowly became lost in an olfactory cacophony of death, spilled blood, and fresh meat. Instinct became a distraction, but also a necessity. Volkov compromised with himself and decided to seek food without straying too far from the trail. Luckily, he did not have to wander far. In the middle of a large plain, an enormous creature laid on the ground. This animal looked much like the elephants Volkov had seen on his home island, but larger and armored like an ankylosaur. It seemed dead at first glance, but as he approached, he could see the smallest amount of chest movement. Soon, he heard the labored, minuscule breathing, and as he stared into its eyes, he could see the spark of life. This poor creature had been paralyzed, bitten into, and left in a near comatose state for seemingly no discernible reason. If this creature was still conscious, it had to have been trapped in a state of perpetual agony. The very thought betrayed Volkov's baser instincts and disturbed his inner thoughts. The former told him that prey left alive was dangerous, and the latter, it simply couldn't stand to see undue suffering. Volkov sank his thumb claw into the jugular of the animal, finishing it in seconds. He thought for a moment that he could see a hint of gratitude as the eyes glazed over. With the suffering now over, Volkov saw the creature only as the fresh meat that he sought. He lowered his head and proceeded to eat his fill. This would be his greatest mistake. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his right leg, unlike anything he had ever faced before. He looked down to see a 6-meter metal spike plunged clean through his thigh, blood trickling down to the point before dripping to the ground. He followed the path to see what was responsible for impaling him. An enormous hybrid with ghostly white scales, standing nearly as tall as him, but with broader shoulders and a sadistic grin filled with blood-red teeth. The scent confirmed what he feared. This was the monster he was sent to kill. The Butcher of Isla Nublar. The hybrid harbinger of doom. The Indominus 2.0. With his wound, Volkov could not run.
The extensive plains meant that he could not hide, and his estimation of his opponent showed that he could not win this fight. His instincts as a simple predator told him to accept his fate. But Volkov was not a simple predator. He was a warrior, the Saurian super soldier, the pride of Hammerfest Isle, and he would not back down. Not from this. Not while the killer of his comrades was staring daggers into his soul. He would avenge the fallen team and fulfill his mission or die trying. Stealing his nerves, he pulled the spike out of his leg, brought it to bear against his opponent, and stared death directly in the eyes. The two opponents circled each other, looking for an opportunity. Believing Volkov to be distracted, the Indominus grabbed hold of the spike in an attempt to wrench the weapon out of its opponent's hands. It didn't take long for Volkov to realize he would lose the tug-of-war, so he relented just as his opponent yanked with all its might. Off balance, the Indom barely had time to steady itself before finding Volkov's beak and teeth sinking deep into its back. It bucked and thrashed in an attempt to shake the attack off, but Volkov held firm, easily moving in tandem with his target without suffering from whiplash. When the two finally separated, Volkov managed to wrench off a sizable chunk of flesh and skin. The Indominus whipped around in retaliation, snapping its jaws once, twice, and 3 times, missing as Volkov managed to evade these blows thrown wildly in anger. But on the third dodge, he put too much pressure on his wounded leg, paralyzing him in pain for merely a split second. That was all the Indominus needed to slam into him like a runaway freight train. Volkov slammed into the ground, the winds knocked completely out of him. Before he could begin to pick himself up, the Indominus had torn open his belly, tearing him to shreds while he watched helplessly. The pain was too great, the damage too extensive. Volkov struggled to muster the strength to fight back, but it was all for naught. His vision began to fade out, before fading in with a mysterious blue light. The air became charged, and an unusual sound overtook the atmosphere. Volkov recognized this phenomenon and knew what was coming next. With the last of his strength, he drew his final breath, taking solace in the fact that it was also his opponent's. Nobody wanted to believe what they saw. Nobody could believe that Operation Jungle Fever had played out the way it did. But the monitors in the control room did not lie. The entire staff stood silent for minutes processing what was displayed so prominently. Volkov, KIA. Everyone on the island had become accustomed to his occasional visits to the base perimeters, and had looked forward to the various reports on his activity and well-being. Escorting the veterinary crew turned from a routine assignment into a position of prestige, as everyone wanted to spend quality time with him. The ion cannon tests had continued longer than necessary once his fascination with them became known. But there would be no more visits. No more competing for escort duty. No more tests solely for show. Volkov's death left a hole that would never again be filled. Isla Nublar itself lies in ruins. Most of the native populations already on the brink had been completely annihilated. The dinosaur populations were driven back to extinction. Many of the once sprawling jungles were reduced to oasis spots dotted around in an endless sea of grass and carnage. There would be no natural recovery for millennia, and the island itself was quarantined to serve as a grim reminder of the consequences of playing God. There was a silver lining to this tragedy. Operation Destroy All Hybrids was reported to be a rousing success. Every rogue Indominus specimen had been confirmed destroyed by the army of hybrids that had landed on Nublar. The two standouts were hybrids known as Chironoceratops barbaricus and Yamabrontorax maximus, the latter being codenamed Gilgamesh. Together, they spearheaded the assault, bringing down several Indominus specimens with gusto. All corporations, organizations, and scientists involved in building the army were invited to a record-setting gala celebrating the victory over the Indominus specimens. Hammerfest Isle declined the invitation. Instead, a vigil was held in honor of Volkov's sacrifice. In the entire history of the Kilo Yankees, this was the only event with perfect attendance. Even those confined to the infirmary demanded that the medical staff mobilize them to attend. Volkov was symbolically buried with honors, given a full 21-gun salute, and posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The Special Ops Division revealed that their insignia would be modified in his image, which would be flown as a flag over the battle lab where he was born. Volkov may have been created as a weapon, but he lived as one of the family, and died a noble warrior.
Every cowboy, he always misses when he's aiming at the target in his head. And every broken man finds his idle hands grasping at tomorrow's promised land. And I've been thinking